Hi guys, I'm Abby. I'm a sales associate here at Fossil Creek Nursery. This will be my third season, so I'm coming right up on 3 years now. It's been really fun. I am a horticulture student. I'll be graduating in May with my degree in horticulture with a concentration in controlled environment agriculture and a minor in sustainability. So I'm really looking forward to that. 43 days to go. Um, and I'm here to talk to you today about medicinal slash edible weeds, how to forage them, what are the rules, what can you get in our area that at least I know about that I've foraged. It's kind of a personal passion, and we're getting right into the season where it's possible. It's really fun if you've got a great group of friends and want to go on a hike. I'll help provide some resources for you guys to engage and give you some options that I've seen around Fort Collins in northern Colorado. But I think I'd really kind of like to start with the laws pertaining to foraging because there are some violations that you can incur. And I don't know about you, but I definitely don't have the dispensary income to afford it. Um, and it generally is separated between state and federal law. So under federal law, what I could find is that they really don't mind if you take, so long as you know that it's an abundant supply and it's nothing that has a really high resale value, like morel mushrooms that go for Gaza money per pound. You would need a foraging license. Um, so it depends on what it is, and they trust you as someone with the knowledge of foraging and what you're taking to be conscientious and preserve the habitat for others to use. And in terms of state law, the state of Colorado, at the very least, and the regional government that we have in our area had just a few resources, and they all seem to indicate that taking and foraging on recreational and wilderness areas is illegal. And they do offer a permit system, but it's pretty rare that they'll afford permits. Conversely, another article that I found said that there are some rangers, the people who would be able to regulate, they don't typically penalize if they find you taking just a few things. And that came from a direct quote. There was a state trooper or maybe a state ranger who basically said, like, if I see you taking a single cattail, I know they're invasive. I know you know what you're doing. So long as you don't overtake, I'm not going to take you in, which is good. And that seems to be the general feeling about foraging, is that so long as you're acting within the limits and you're kind of using your brain and not overtaking, then people really don't mind. And as far as I could tell on federal property, or I mean, private property, so long as the person that you are taking from, which could be your own private property, in that case, it's not a big issue. But so long as the private owner is okay with it, then you shouldn't run into too many issues, which is nice. The other thing I wanted to say about taking from any of these properties, but especially the state and private properties, is that you just want to ensure that you are not taking from an area where pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers have been applied that would not be safe to eat. And I had my own experience with this whenever I was, I think, 16. And I had borrowed some dandelion blooms to make a tea from a neighbor's yard. And my mom made the really good point that I'd not considered, that we don't know what that's been sprayed with. We don't know what the yard's history is. So generally, you'd want to take from someone that has good record keeping, hopefully applies food safe things, or generally just leaves the weeds be. Um, and there are a ton of weeds that are edible, medicinal, so on and so forth. And my personal preference is to take from weeds that I know are non-native or invasive, just because I feel like it benefits my habitat in my region as much as it benefits me. And I can do my own part to restore the local habitat. So it's kind of a cool working relationship that I can have and engage with. Um, and Oh, I wanted to provide everybody some resources in case this is something that you're interested in and you would like to start engaging in. And there is a website that is fantastic called Foraging Colorado, I believe. I don't have my source right in front of me, but there's a ton of really cool articles on what to forage, what's seasonal in our northern Colorado area, and kind of how to go about collecting things. There's a certain time, there's a certain place that you can usually find these things. So that's a really great resource. And of course, I'd always recommend looking into your state and regional laws if you're not here in Fort Collins, just to be sure that you are preserving any delicate habitat like we have here on the Front Range, and decreasing your chance of running into any issues or trouble. But with that, I think I'm pretty comfortable to start talking about my personal experience and weeds that I know are kind of in the area that you guys can take home. And lots of them will be in your yard. And lots of them you will know as kind of infamous weeds, sadly, that lots of people target to get out of their lawns. So initially, I'd like to start with dandelion because I feel like that's a really accessible and common weed that a lot of people struggle with. It's got a really big taproot. It can be hard to pull out. It can be hard to deal with. They seed. I don't believe they're perennial, but they are definitely pretty quick and they spread quickly. And I will get to questions at the end. Thank you for your question. But I promise I'll get to it. And I'd love to see your all's questions in the comments, and I'll get to them at the end. But the dandelion is kind of a triple threat, as it were. The root is edible, the leaves are edible, and the blooms are also edible. And the nice thing is that they are probably the prettiest part of this whole process. If you wanted to make dandelion syrup or dandelion tea, as far as I remember, dandelion has a high amount of vitamin C in the leaves specifically, and the dandelion root and blooms, I think, are generally used for, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Like coating your throat and dealing with issues in terms of needing a little bit more comfort there. And next, I think I'll get into another common one, plantain. And that is, it's a green, it's got kind of like lettucey leaves almost, and that's that same kind of color. And that is one that has antiseptic properties. And that's what I've used it for. I've made it into it's like a Neosporin. I've made it into a salve for my niece who's 3 and runs into lots of bumped knees, scraped elbows as a 4-year-old. So I've really enjoyed working with that plant and making that for the people around me and bringing it along. It's come in really helpful sometimes during hikes or going tubing on the Pooter as well. And that one is pretty easy to spot. I know here it's fairly common, and it grows really well here, and it's actually a plant that's native to the Mediterranean. So it was brought over here. It's a non-native plant, and it grows everywhere. So I hope that lots of you will be able to spot it. And I'd highly recommend using a resource like a book or your local community. I know there's lots of Facebook groups, independent of your area usually, that do foraging and have resources. In case you wanted to do this as a community kind of event as well as on your own. And it's always good to have an expert, and that expert can be a book, which in general is where I got a lot of my resources. I took a whole class at CSU on weeds, and unfortunately a lot of that class was how to get rid of weeds, but based on my prior experience and knowledge, I was able to make some connections and find stuff and the scientific names and what about it and how to spot it. That allowed me to kind of save it as a resource instead of just killing it outright. To answer your question really quick, this is going to be recorded later, and if you need to jump out and watch that later, it's going to be on the Fossil Creek YouTube really quick. And with that, I think I'll jump into another one that I know of, and it's called common mallow, and it's a relative of the actual mallow plant. It grows really well here. It's very easy to spot, and it grows huge, and it's got this gigantic taproot that is really good for, like with the dandelion, like kind of soothing your mouth and throat area. So the same as whenever people recommend that you eat a marshmallow whenever your throat is sore, it's because it kind of coats the throat and provides some comfort in that regard. And I've actually used it that way, and I had some really good success. The leaves can also be made into a tea. They're little, like coin shaped, like they've got a really strong, like crinkly texture. And the root looks a lot like the dandelion root. It's just pale and long and hard to pull out. Sorry, lost my train of thought. But that's another really good one that grows really big in this area. And I do not have any pictures of these. I couldn't decide whether or not to print them out or provide them, so I'm just going to give you guys the common names, because I also don't have a list of the scientific names, unfortunately. And you can always reach out to us here. We have the Instagram and Facebook if you guys have any questions about, is this the right plant? Of course, you never want to eat something that you don't know what it is. And next, another invasive plant that we have a ton of here is common mullein. And this is one that I actually have with me. I brought some samples, I guess. And this one is really interesting. It was traditionally used to soothe respiratory issues. And it's often smoked, actually. And I've known someone who has used it in that regard. And he said he had pretty good results with it. It can also be made into a tea, and it's invasive here in Colorado, and there's a ton of it, and it's something you can take home. This is a sample that I pulled from an area out near Santa Fe that I took home. And I'll just go through the rest of the samples that I have, and then I can give you guys some resources on, like you said, how to grow food and medicine. And I'm here for any questions that you have, and I can hold them until the end, since that's definitely my job here as well. Second to last, I have Feverfew. It looks a ton like chamomile. It's usually used for headaches, actually, instead of fevers, is what I found out while researching. I got this from a local flower farmer. She had some specimens, parts of the plant that she didn't use that I was able to take home and use because they were not up to her industry standard, but I was happy to take them home. And lastly, I have the Asnia Lichen, I believe it's called. My partner's sister actually pointed this out, and we harvested some together. And we harvested this in an area outside of Santa Fe as well while we were visiting there. It's not something that I've seen a ton of in Colorado, and I'm not super sure. This one is Feverfew. And this is typically grown from seed. Sorry to change subject. But this one, while I was doing some research, I more took some home because I was curious about it. And I haven't done anything with it yet. I've been much too busy. But what I found is that it has anti-inflammatory and anti-cancerous effects is what people think currently. And there's not a ton of research done on it. That's a lot of the cases with these medicinal plants. Unfortunately, there's kind of a taboo in the medicinal and pharmaceutical fields against using natural and plant-based alternatives to prescription medicines, but in fact, 40% of pharmaceuticals today are based on plant medicine that's been used for centuries. People have used this kind of resource for a long time, and I think it's interesting that people seem to be coming back to it and kind of relearning ancient knowledge and trying to use it for our own health. Um, and with that, I had some more seeds I can go over, but I think I'd like to take some questions here and I'm really curious what you guys are interested in and what I can talk about because this class is pretty open-ended and I was hoping that it would be mostly watcher guided. So I think I'll do that first and then we can circle back if you guys are curious about anything else that I have. And so I just want to answer a question that I saw come up, and they were saying that they were hoping to learn some how to grow food and medicine, which connects really well with the seeds that I have right here. It's pretty uncommon to find medicinal plants in nurseries. A lot of times it's going to be something in your local resource, and I do have seeds here at Fort Collins or Fossil Creek Nursery that we do sell, but it definitely takes some learning. And the nice thing is there's lots of things that have a use or are edible. Like we sell the redbud here and the flowers that are blooming about now, maybe a couple weeks from now. Those are edible and they've got kind of a sour taste and they're supposed to be super yummy. We have the Staghorn Sumac. Typically sumacs are toxic, but that is one where the bloom, I believe, is edible and sometimes is made into cocktails, which is really interesting. I have to try it soon. We also have junipers here, and obviously everybody thinks of juniper berries with gin. You could find a local resource or grow some huge junipers yourself through some different cultivation techniques and harvest the berries and make some homemade gin if that's something that you find interesting. So having an edible garden is more about knowing and having resources to pull from to put those plants in your garden than it is going to the nursery and picking up gallon pots of every single kind of perennial and knowing exactly what the use is. We don't typically sell a lot of these, unfortunately, because a lot of medicinal plants, and that includes the weeds, are not cultivated for ornamental use, for yard use. They can be really tough and homely plants, unfortunately, so it's uncommon to see bred varieties. But I have some of these here that are perfect, that would provide year-round color, that would provide you with food and some medicine if you want, and just generally add a little bit of a holistic health benefit to your home. And I am not super common. I will definitely admit to not knowing too many just edibles. I have a personal interest in the medicinal plants, so that's mostly what I have resources on. I'm trying to think of what I've heard of people eating though. Crab apples are edible. They are not always super yummy, but they make a really yummy jam is what I've heard. And trying to think what else I've heard of people eating. I believe there is a kind of wild carrot that looks a lot like Queen Anne's lace, so you get the flower benefit and the teeny tiny carrot at the end. And they have that on my grandmother's farm out in Missouri, and we used to have some of those. Or there's a plant called sheepshire. That's the name that I know it by. I haven't looked into it too much because it's such a fond childhood memory, and we have some out here, but not like they have out in Missouri. And they have like a kind of like a really tart, sour taste. They look like little clovers, and they are really delicious. They were always a little snack if you were out and about and you weren't able to get home in time to feed yourself before you got really hungry. Then you could always eat sheepshire. Um, let's see. Let's start moving on to some other questions. So I see pollinator area in my yard. And generally the structure that you're looking for is going to be a really open, accessible bloom. So I have this poppy here. That would be great. I've seen a bajillion bees on these. I worked at a flower farm last summer, and they were always all over poppies. And the variety that the grower that I worked with had was the same species, but a purple variety, and it was really just beautiful. These two are also really good examples of that really open, accessible pollen for bees specifically. Um, and they both the bee essentially just lands on the plant. It doesn't have to get through. Sometimes we have bumblebees here that are a little too big to pollinate some of our flowers, and they try their best. But it's important to keep that structure in mind. And then I have this echinacea here, and calendula also follow that same size and shape, where it's just kind of like a big landing platform. All of these produce a lot of pollen, and that's kind of why I find a lot of bees on these all summer. I also want to point out some more unusual options. I have here milkweed and forage. The milkweed I have heard about people just eating singularly almost, and I wouldn't say I've ever tried it, but I've heard good things. And the borage I have worked with. It's supposed to be a very mild, kind of almost pain reliever. I've heard of people using it in a salve for arthritis, which is what I used it for a person that I knew in my personal life, and she really liked it. So it is beautiful. It has these gigantic kind of dark green serrated and hairy leaves, and then the blooms are from a range of kind of a darkish purpley blue to a lighter like purple. And this packet is correct. The bees do love borage, and it's another one that they will seek out and really enjoy. And lastly, I just have Nasturtium and Viola. Viola is not really one that the pollinators go to too often, so I'll kind of just mention that and move on. The Nasturtium, I do usually see some animals, I guess you could call them animals, some insects on. I think really these are awesome for attracting a wider range of pollinators. It depends a lot on what you're trying to attract. Usually you can garner different kinds of interest for different pollinators. So different colors that people like or that pollinators like, including reds and oranges for hummingbirds and bees, which I believe like the two ends of the spectrum, so reds and purples. Hummingbirds really just love reds, I guess, and we have a lot of plants here that really attract them. And bumblebees work in the same range, reds, and then they kind of skip this middling section with greens and over to purples. That's kind of the colors that they can see and are attracted to. And beetles, which is kind of an unusual one that people don't often think about. Beetles are typically attracted to yellows and whites. So the natural pollinator for a lotus is a kind of beetle. Not that we can usually grow lotus out here unless you have a pond. Of course, the Denver Botanic Garden is a perfect example of lotuses out here in Colorado. But just as an example of the colors that beetles are usually attracted to, it's good to attract a wide range of anything that you can get in to recreate an ecosystem, and kind of it usually leads to a healthier environment, in my personal opinion. Of course, just like the medicinal resources we have on just plant-based medicine, there's not a ton of research, unfortunately, so we have to look back into a lot of more ancestral sources to find where these can benefit us and where that structure can benefit us. To answer another question that I see in here, I believe all of these seeds can be grown in zone 9. I'd be really surprised if they didn't. Typically, um, the way that the cold hardiness system works is that you have a spectrum from, I believe it's 1 all the way to 11 or 12. And 1 would be somewhere like Alaska, somewhere where winters are very cold and stay very cold. The average winter low is very low. And by comparison, 12 and 11 are very high. So somewhere like Hawaii, where the winter's very mild and lots of things will live right through the winter and not be required to drop their leaves. And we are here in zone 5B. There's been some discussion about bumping us up to 6, but no information on that yet besides some talk in the culture and community that we have here. So I believe that within that range that all of these seeds that I just showed you would grow just fine in 9B. The only issue that I could see you running into with some plants is plants that have a cold requirement, like apples, for example, is one that I know for sure usually have a cold requirement. And if they don't receive however many hours under 32 degrees, then they don't set fruit next year. But in the case of these perennials, I don't know that they have cold requirements, and I'd be pretty surprised. Let's see. So I've kind of gone over everything that I feel like I really wanted to hit on. I'm trying to think of what else what else people might be curious about. To answer the first question, the source that I found was from the USDA's Forest Service. I don't have a lot of information regarding different states, unfortunately, but to reiterate, the general feeling around foraging is that if you can take it, it's an abundant supply, you're not going to resell it or overtake, then I've never seen a ton of recourse or issues that people have run into while foraging. Let's see. I guess I'll go a little bit into mushroom foraging. It's not something that I've done a ton of personally, and I think that's especially because it can be very lucrative, and generally places require you to either leave it be or get a permit. I know the Forest Service requires you to have a permit because it is something that is lucrative and has a monetary value. So we do have a couple mushrooms that I've seen in a mycology Facebook group that I'm a part of, and people are just kind of starting to forage. There's a couple species that you can forage during the winter in wetter parts of the state, so usually the western slope is where I've seen more people be able to access. But my family always skied Copper Mountain, and there are lots of morels up there. It is something that typically grows on burn sites, which is really interesting. I wouldn't say that I have a really good grasp on the knowledge behind why they choose those spots or why they're abundant, but they are really cool looking. They're kind of a deep brown to a creamy brown, and they almost look like a brain in texture. It's really neat. And we had the opportunity to at least see some and then go home and identify them and read a little bit about them. I was only 13 or 14, so it was a really neat experience to have that young, to be able to go out to where they were, access them. Not that we took any home, but just to see them growing somewhere that even I kind of had access to and saw and was able to think about how people can really start to cultivate within their area. And I think it's been really cool to see almost kind of bloom, I guess I would say, in this sector of people being curious about growing food, growing medicine. It's been a joy to help people here and try and provide what little knowledge I have, just as someone who's looked into resources and has sought a degree, and providing them with assistance. But with that, are there any more questions? I feel like this one wrapped up pretty quick, but I definitely wanted it to be more discussion based and guided by what you guys were curious about, since it's such a big field that we could go into and a lot of things that we could discuss. But with that, if there are no other questions, I think this is probably a pretty natural place to wrap it up. Thank you, Jenna. And you can always contact us through the Facebook and the Instagram. We have a YouTube. This will be recorded if you want to watch it later, where you can access it. And we're always open to questions. We got lots of experts here. I'm definitely wouldn't call myself the most expert. We have lots of good people here that can help you. Even if you're out of state, we always love to see. Yeah, we'll figure that out for sure. But we can definitely provide aid where it's needed. And let's see. Yeah, I'll figure out how to either list the seeds that I liked and that you could grow in your garden. And I will put them in the comments, I believe. I don't know if we can do a picture. Lots of food for the honeybees. Me too. I love honeybees. Let's see. How do you want to?
We can put it in the discussion on the event page.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's done in post.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, solid. So speaking to the behind the scenes master, she's hoping to put a list of these in the discussion underneath. Yeah, in the event page on our website. And
it'll be on Facebook.
Oh, it'll be on Facebook. Oh my God, you're already here. You can already look at it. But I'll put a resource, all of these down there, and any more that I can think of that I did not have seeds of to show you, so that you can access that here on Facebook. You won't even have to go to the website. But thanks so much for joining me. It was really enjoyable. This is something that I love learning about, especially as someone who would not call myself a true expert, but someone who has definitely done some fun stuff, gone some fun places, and taken some fun stuff home. So yeah, just please reach out and we will put that list. And I can also list the pollinators. I can happily do that in the discussion underneath this on Facebook. So thank you for joining me. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll hopefully hear from you soon. So enjoy the rest of your day.